After facing many challenges in her own life that led to an overdose, physical violence, and mild drug abuse, our guest on today's show was led to share her story in hopes of helping others find restoration and redemption. On today's program, we will talk about her new book, Diaries of a Fatherless Daughter, a story of reclaimed identity. We will also hear the testimonies of other women who have or are walking through the same journey. Stay tuned.
Strength will rise as we wait upon the Lord. Wait upon the Lord. We will wait upon the Lord. Strength will rise as we wait upon the Lord. Wait upon the Lord. We will wait upon the Lord our God. You reign forever. Our hope, our strong deliverer. You are the everlasting God, the everlasting God. You do not faint, you won't grow weary. You're the defender of the weak. You comfort those in need. You lift us up on like eagles. Oh, strength will rise as we wait upon the Lord. Wait upon the Lord. We will wait upon the Lord. Strength will rise as we wait upon the Lord. Wait upon the Lord. We will wait upon the Lord our God. You reign forever. Our hope, our strong deliverer. You are the everlasting God. Yes, you are everlasting God. You do not faint, you won't grow weary. You're the defender of the weak. You comfort those in need. You lift us up on wings like eagles. You are the everlasting God. Yes, you are everlasting God. You do not think you won't grow weary. You're the defender of the weak. You comfort those in need. You lift us up on wings like eagles. Ooh, the everlasting God.
Welcome to the Everlasting Love Show. So glad that you tuned in today. We have the absolute privilege of hearing from Brandy Oliver, who has written a new book. It's called Diaries of a Fatherless Daughter. And today we're going to talk about restoration and just reclaiming our lives after having experienced the lack of fathering in our lives. And we'll have the opportunity to hear from some of Brandy's friends, some women in her life who have been mentors, women she's grown up with, and others that she has met through her church community. We'll share their stories too about what life has been like not having a father in the picture. Well, welcome to the show, ladies. It's so awesome to have you here.
Thank you.
Good to be sitting in your presence.
Likewise.
And I just have to say, Brandy, I got your book and I read through most of it.
Okay.
And I was really captivated, actually, even in the opening, which I'm going to read in just a minute. But first of all, I want to introduce you to the ladies on our show today. We have Brandy, who is the author of our book that we'll be talking a little bit more about today. And then we have Latonya, and then we have Nicole as well. So both of you are going to be sharing your stories, all having the common bond of fatherlessness to some degree in your lives, which I think a lot of our listeners will be able to relate to. But before we jump into that, I would love to hear a little bit about your stories. One of the things that we do on this show that is really beneficial and gives people hope and a little bit of kind of camaraderie in some ways is hearing the stories of others. I think stories actually have a super big impact. Our stories matter in our lives, right? And our stories can have an impact on other people who hear them, because it's fascinating to me that even though someone's story may not be exactly like mine, there's always something in there that establishes common ground, and I think just builds a bond and a level of relating in a way that not sharing our stories, it just wouldn't allow for that. So would love to hear a little bit about your story. And Brandy, we're going to start with you.
Okay.
So tell us a little bit about how you grew up and a little bit about your journey up until this point.
Okay. So I am an only child, my mother's only child. So I grew up in the household with just me and her once she moved out of her mom's house. I grew up in Chicago. I will say that I was a happy kid. I think I first realized that I was angry about not having my father around the age of like 12. As I progressed into my teen years, I started to struggle with not having his presence there and looking for that attention in men, men much older than me. And so I looked to them for guidance and everything that my father would have given me. And then I went away to college. I had a disastrous relationship that caused me to return back home. And then I just tried to navigate the waters from there. I moved to Arizona in like an Abrahamic experience. I left everything I owned and moved to Arizona around 2008 and started to write about my experiences and how the Lord was speaking to me. And then I returned home, kind of fell into the same pattern, moved back to Arizona, and then finally the Lord started to heal my heart and came back to Chicago, went back to grad school, finished up the book, and here we are.
Wow. So was faith always a part of your upbringing, or at what point did your faith become real for you?
It was always a part of my upbringing. I grew up in the church, got baptized very young, always kind of had a relationship with the Lord. But I think in my mid-teens, when I started to become angry, I thought that God didn't really care about me. He didn't want to see me like deceased or dead or hurt, but he wasn't really that concerned with what was going on in my life.
And thank you for saying that, because I think a lot of people can relate to that.
Yeah.
A lot of people can relate to feeling like God is silent, especially in times where we may be struggling and we wonder, do you even care, God?
Right.
Like, I'm crying out to you, do you even see what's going on? And so I think that is a thing that a lot of people can relate to. So you were kind of in that period of wondering if God was seeing the things that were happening in your life. What happened after that?
I started to see him sort of, I would pray about something and then I would hear a message related to my prayer, and I started to realize that he was answering me, that he could hear me, and it wasn't his desire for my father and I to have that relationship, and that he was available. And he came and started to walk alongside me. I think in 2008, when I was in Arizona by myself, no family, no friends, is when he really began to speak to me, and my faith became more real, and he assured me that he does care.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you kind of got out of some of the behaviors that were destructive for you, and then you found yourself back in them.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
That was, I want to say that was part of the most shameful part of my life. It's sort of like you're dating a guy and you're like, I'm leaving him alone. You tell your friends that I moved on and I'm mature now, and I realize only to be back with him and have to deal with that embarrassment. So it was sort of like that. I thought that I had figured it out. I thought that I understood what faith is, but I've just really come to learn that this process is never ending. And so my faith was being worked out in that point. So it was a real struggle. It was very humbling for me. And he, again, still restored me.
Yeah, we never just arrive
right.
in our faith, right?
Yeah.
Just when we think, gosh, I've reached a new level of learning, there's just a whole nother opportunity in God's graciousness and sovereignty, although it doesn't feel like that at the time, but sometimes hindsight can be 20/20 of like, oh, now I know why you walked me through that. So how would you say that experience inspired you to write this book?
It reminded me that even when you think you have it figured out, you don't have it figured out. And then I just wanted to remind women that they're not alone. Sometimes we think that we're the only ones that are going through the situation, or we're the only ones that took back the boyfriend that wasn't any good for us. But it's important, I think, for women to know, especially women as believers, that it's a process and you're not by yourself.
Right. And sometimes we can just, the voices in our head want to cause us to isolate. Right? And to withdraw even from community and friends, because we do feel that degree of shame, and then isolating just gets us in a worse pattern. But it takes a lot of courage to be able to share our stories and our struggles with others so that they can actually do what they can to intervene and share theirs and show that we're not alone.
Right.
Well,
we be our biggest critics.
We are our biggest critics. What is going on with that? I know I'm reading this other book, and it's talking about how, like, literally the way we can criticize ourselves, or the voices in our head, and I think you actually even talk about this a little bit in your book, like we have to create and choose new thoughts, even though it may be very difficult. And I want to hear a little bit more about your wisdom and insight in that topic in just a handful of minutes. But we do tend to be our own worst critic, for sure. I think especially all the women are saying amen who are watching this, and probably some of the men as well. Well, Latonya, tell us a little bit about your story growing up, and as I asked Brandy to describe the relationship between the two of you, I think at one point you were her supervisor, is that right?
I was. I had the tremendous pleasure of working alongside of her, and she's a superstar in her own right.
Yeah, she also described you as her mentor, and this is my favorite, her cheerleader. We all need a committee. We all need at least a couple people cheering for us, right? Well, tell us a little bit about your story, because I know it really weaves into part of the theme of the book of fatherlessness and not having that presence of a father in your life. So tell us a little bit about how you grew up and about that, and a little bit about your faith story too.
Absolutely. Well, my parents got married pretty young and sadly divorced when I was very young. My brother and I are the only two children from that relationship. Our home growing up was abusive. My mom was a victim of domestic violence, and as a little one, I have very vivid memories of being quiet but observant and seeing that play out before my little eyes, not really understanding what was happening, but rationalizing within myself that whatever it was not good. As time went on, my parents separated, ultimately divorced, and my mom found herself as a single mom of two children, endeavoring to do her very, very best. My adolescent, teenage years, we had a pretty tumultuous relationship. I was very angry. I, like Brandy, I'm a church girl, and so we very rarely missed a Sunday. I didn't realize until I was much older that I didn't have a relationship with the Lord, but much rather I was a traditionalist. You know, you went to church because that's just what you did. But I'm grateful for that experience, because being in the church, even through those difficult times as I grew up and became very promiscuous, very belligerent in many ways in my mannerisms and behaviors against my mom. Very devastating as a mom myself now when I reflect back and consider the things that I put her through and her fortitude to persevere and yet love me. Only a mother's love. As I grew into my late teens, it was probably the height of my promiscuity. And for me, what resonated in the absence of having my father was I didn't feel valued. I didn't feel that I had self-worth. And so because of that, it caused me to seek validation. And I didn't feel lovable. I did not, in spite of my mother's effort, feel loved enough. And so the temporary love that I obtained, so I thought it was love, it was very much lust, in these illicit relationships that I entered into, only filled the void for so long. It resulted in a teenage pregnancy in my late teens. And that really was the beginning of the end of that life of searching for this father figure identity in the hearts of men. The number of relationships that I had each wounded me and made me feel, left me feeling discarded. And so all that did was it added to this sense of unworthiness. Sure, you're cute, you're attractive, you're a smart girl, but there's something wrong with you because men don't stay, they don't love you, they don't speak into your value and to your self-worth. And so I carried that. I carried that for so long. And as I developed and grew within my profession and career and established an identity in that way, it served to mask the fact that I really didn't know in its entirety who I really was as a woman. So I love the subtitle of Brandy's book, Reclaimed Identity. It wasn't until I had a face-to-face encounter with the Lord at home in my bedroom where he began to really minister to my heart. He began to just show me how he loved me, that I was lovable, that I was full of, worth, and that I was valuable.
Tell us a little bit about that encounter.
Well, that was during a season where my routine was party all the time. I held a full-time job, very responsible with that job, but the weekend was full of all kind of ridiculousness, if I could just say it that way. And there was a ritual with the friends that I had at the time where every weekend we went out and it was revelry and it was mayhem and you were proud of it.
And all trying to your point, fill something.
Something.
Because we put relationships in our life. We put behaviors that aren't helpful or healthy long term, but in the short term they mask something or numb something or we get something from it. But to your point, it always
albeit
comes
temporarily, but nonetheless you still seek for it.
Right.
I was watching a Christian television program at that time, and the minister was really unfolding things in the Bible that I had not heard of before. Again, I'm a church girl. I knew the Gospels. I knew Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But when you start talking to me about God is love, for some odd reason, those scriptures in Ephesians and Philippians and Romans, these scriptures evaded me. So it began to soften my heart in a way that drew my attention to the Lord. And one evening we went out. I was not in any way excited. I had the vehicle, I was the driver, so they relied upon me picking everyone up and dropping everyone off. And we arrived at this venue. I sat down, everyone, assumed their rightful places and positions, and there was a gentleman from a distance who I saw sauntering up to me in the dark in the smoke-filled room, and I just thought, Lord, help me, not tonight. And he was clearly inebriated, but the closer he got, he sobered up, he straightened up. He sat his drink on the table, he leaned over and said, you know, you don't belong here. He picked his drink up and he walked away. I grabbed my purse, I found my friends, I said, I'm leaving.
Wow.
And that was my last outing experience like that. And I just I threw myself, into all that I knew at that time. All that I knew. If God was in it, I wanted it. If his healing was there, if the Bible was talking about it, those scriptures, I just gravitated. It became my life source. It separated me from that crowd I hung with, and that was painful, because I thought surely you'd understand and be happy for me. Little did I realize that the Lord was repositioning me. I didn't realize it at the time, but I'm so thankful.
Yes.
And so he's done a tremendous work in my life and my heart. Even with the thoughts that I feel towards my father, who is still living, we don't have a relationship. There was a season where we endeavored to reconcile, and I have to take some ownership. I think for me, I placed such a great expectation on him to make up the past, you know, make it all up to me. And if you're not able to do that, it's not sufficient. It's not good enough. Your efforts don't prove to me that you're sorry or that you love me. Being much more mature now, more seasoned, not only in life, but in my Christian experience, I recognize that was wrong. The Lord doesn't hold anything over us. And so he's really ushered me into a place of true forgiveness. And even as you forgive those relationships that have been detrimental, and those relationships where you have such a huge void, there's still the navigating piece. You may still be left with not really knowing how to formulate a new relationship. And so my heart is open to that, that the Lord will orchestrate that one day for he and I. And you know, our God is Redeemer. He redeems the time.
Yes,
so I
he
believe that that's my promise, and the promise for my Father, that he'll redeem the time for us, and the short time will be as if it were all the years that we seemingly missed.
Yeah, wow. You have learned a lot on your years on this planet so far, so rich. I can only imagine what God is going to have come out of your wise mouth in the future. I mean, it just reminds me of that God uses everything for our good and for his glory if we're paying attention, right? So we have to wake up. And we have to say no to some things. And I'm sure there are some listeners too who, you know, even if we hang out with a crowd that is not healthy for us, there's something there that we're not willing to give up, because at least there's something familiar and comfortable, even if it's not beneficial. So it does take an act of the Lord, but also an act of our will to say, you know what, I'm going to not engage in this anymore and trust that there's something different and better, which isn't always easy.
It's not.
But your story gives us hope that it's possible.
Absolutely.
Nicole, we would love to hear your story. And when I asked Brandy about the connection between the two of you, I think you met at church, right?
Correct.
And she described you as a ball of wisdom. So I'm just surrounded with wisdom here. In this time. So would love to hear a little bit about your story as well. Tell us a little bit about Nicole and your background and upbringing as it relates to having a father that was not there, who was absent, and a little bit about your faith journey too.
Okay. I am the baby of 12 siblings, a combined family. My parents were married. I was a daddy's girl. Wherever Daddy was, that's where I wanted to be, and that's where I was. Daddy was in the back working on cars, that's where I was too. So Daddy taught me a few things mechanically that still sticks today. But by the time I was 14, Daddy died. And so my 8th grade year going into high school was very crucial, not having him around and just dealing with him not being there. My parents were very close-knit, and it truly was till death did them part. And so even in the home, things were just numb with him not being there. It happened suddenly. And so we had to adjust. And that's the only word I can really use as what we did. We adjusted and just went on. By the time I was 19, Mom died. And so those destructive behaviors that Brandy described in her book is where I was as well. And I was very angry with God because I didn't understand, why would you take both of my parents? I need them. With me being the last child, all of my siblings were much older than me, so I felt deprived. Why was I the only one who didn't get to have them there? So it wasn't until I had my son at 23, things began to change for me, because now I'm responsible for someone. And I had that moment as well. I grew up in church. We went to church because that's what we did, ritually, traditionally. And it wasn't until I had a moment with the Lord on the L platform, walking out of a job because of destructive behaviors I could not get a hold of. And I said, God, if you don't help me, I'm going to die. What's going to happen to my son? And it was at that moment, waiting for the train, that he began to minister to me. I, too, didn't know anything about having a relationship with him until I got myself back into church. And it was just amazing. It was like a veil had been uncovered. And as you do that, and as these young ladies have stated, you just thrust yourself into him, and he began to love me unconditionally, to give me that father's love. And I could call him daddy and go to him and curl up in his lap and let him stroke me and tell me I am the apple of his eye and I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. And as he did that, that began to heal me. But I'm still my biggest critic, and he's still working on me with that. But I wouldn't change a thing, because it has made me who I am today, and he's still doing wonderful things in me to make me better.
Yeah. Wow. It just always interesting to hear you have different stories about fatherlessness, that you had a great relationship with your dad and lost him at a young age, and having an estranged relationship. And have you ever met your dad, Brandy?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
We have a relationship. I was just never a priority. He married, him and my mom had been together since they were 16. They had me at 22. And then he married, I think I was about maybe 7. And so his new focus was his family and his wife. So I was kind of left by the wayside, to be honest.
Right.
So I knew where he was, and I could call him, but I was just never a priority.
It is so fascinating, the love of a father.
Yeah.
It is. I shared with you guys a little bit earlier that my dad unexpectedly passed a couple years ago, and we did not have the closest relationship growing up, not because that he was a bad person, that wasn't the case. And by God's grace, for the last 6 years of his life, he was one of my best friends. And it was healing. A father's love can be very healing. And my prayer would be that everybody would have that experience of the earthly father, but we don't always have that experience. So by God's grace, we do have that experience with our Heavenly Father, who doesn't leave us, doesn't forsake us, always has our best interest. And so just having faith and being so deeply rooted and anchored in that is so, so critical. What would any one of you ladies say to someone watching who they may not know the love of Christ, they may not know the love of a Heavenly Father? What would you say? Any advice that you would give, or how does one even begin to kind of step into knowing more about that?
I would say that he always has your best interests at heart. Similar to like an earthly parent, we kind of think, I don't want to do, as a teenager, I don't want to do this. My mom doesn't love me. My dad doesn't love me. But he always has your best interests at heart, even when it seems like he doesn't. And if you seek him, if you really truly seek him, he will respond. I'm a living witness that he answers your prayers.
Yes, he does.
Amen. When I've talked to some women, what I've said is, just start praying. God, would you reveal yourself to me?
Yeah.
Just like we're sitting here, we can have the same kind of conversation with him.
Absolutely.
And he'll enter the room, and the peace will just surpass anything you've ever known, and you'll know he's there.
Yeah. We have a couple other ladies that are joining our show today that we have the privilege of hearing from and hearing their stories. We have Shyvana Cole, who is with us. Welcome to the show. And we also have Alesia Jackson. Glad to have you here. Welcome. So as we did at the top end of the show, we just love hearing our stories and how we can really connect with one another, even if we grew up in a lot of different external circumstances. We all share some common themes and some common threads in our story. So that's the beauty of story and how it just really connects us. Yeah. So let's take a handful of minutes and hear about your stories. Do us the honor and privilege of telling us a little bit about yours. But first of all, when I asked Brandy about Shyvana, she said that you guys have known each other since you've been 10. Is that right?
Yep.
And that you are a mental health counselor.
Yes.
And so I think your friendship and also your training and background, Brandy said she's made many phone calls to you, so your education has paid off in many ways as you've helped your good friend to work through some of life well. And I think that's just so awesome because as friends, we're meant to walk with each other through difficult things, and the fact that you have that training. I'm actually curious, I'm going to divert a little bit. What made you go into the mental health field? And maybe it's even part of your story, so I should just let you tell your story.
Well, it is, and I didn't realize it until recently how much my background played into my path now as a counselor. So, and so just a little bit about me then, and then I can answer, hopefully answers.
Great.
Well, I am an only child on my father's side. So I'm his only child, but I do have a younger brother. And so I grew up with my mother and my grandmother. So I had like two moms in the home. And you know what? And my dad was in and out of jail, so he was not around. But I felt that I was happy. Like, my family was close, and I had a lot of women in my family, a lot of women. And so they were always like, well, this is what you need to do to be, you know, a good woman, and this is what you need to learn. And so I thought I was good. Like, I have all these women telling me, you know, this is the path that you need to take, and this is how you should behave and how you should dress. And so my dad not being around didn't really faze me. And so, and even church, I had a strong spiritual background. I've been in church as early as I can remember. My aunt and uncle took me to church with them. So I went like 3-4 days a week. Like, I was involved in programs. And yeah, so I know Jesus, and I just thought I was good. And so one of the things that my aunts and my grandmother were like big on is, you know, we don't want you to get caught up in men, so we're going to tell you how beautiful you are, how smart you are, so that when a guy tells you, you know, you're not like head over heels, you know, like, or losing it, as they would put it. Right. And so, yeah, and so I remember dating, it's like, so what? You know, like if a guy would say something, so what? And, you know, they weren't significant to me. And it wasn't until my last relationship that I was in for over 10 years that ended up being emotionally abusive, psychologically abusive, that I was like, why did I put up with that? Like, you know, giving him so many chances and being at a low, being depressed, not telling anyone because I was embarrassed because I knew better, you know, and it wasn't until then that I realized, no, it was after then. So I got out of the relationship, and then I moved to California. So I moved to California actually just last year to be a life coach and for families, adolescents. And I met this guy, and he just asked me to tell him about myself. Just like now. And I told him maybe like and I was like, that's really weird. Like, who says that? And so I told him a few things about my relationship, and he was like, what's your dad like? And I'm like, Come to find out he was a counselor too. But he said, you dated someone just like your dad. And I was like, how so? And so, in him telling me that, I had to think back, like, my father what stands out the most is that my father did not put me as a priority, like someone else mentioned, but I was not a priority. And my father gave money every now and again, and that was his contribution. But he doesn't think that he did anything wrong. So I was with this guy that, because he was a provider and because he was there, but totally didn't value me, totally didn't respect me, totally didn't, do any of the things that your mate should do. I kind of accepted it, and I realized how my father was actually this, like, he thinks I'm good. Like, you had a great mom. I didn't need to be there, and I didn't realize how much that feeling of rejection. So it was like a feeling of rejection. And so in that relationship, I was step parenting. I was doing a bunch of things, and then I realized like how the importance of having both parents there, the importance of having that father present there in your life, and some of the things that they can teach you. And so I feel like that kind of led me to, in hindsight, now I'm like, I am really drawn towards adolescents, teens, and families that are broken, that have a lot of dynamics. There's a lot of broken bridges, miscommunication. Parents can be there and not have a clue what's going on with their kids, not really knowing how to connect. And so my passion is bridging that gap and really helping parents to connect with their kids, and then vice versa. So it might not be ideal, but making sure that there's at least a healthy communication, and that everybody kind of knows what they're saying. Because my mom actually thought I was okay too. Like, you're good. You have all these women. You're a woman. We taught you well. My dad's like, hey, you had a great mom. You're okay. Never thought about that I might need advice on men, or showing how to be, how to be loved and how to be treated, and things like that. So
yeah, we talked about that a little bit earlier, about the love of a father really has an impact. So it's more than the material, provision. It's the father, our earthly father, is oftentimes the one that kind of tells us, is everything right in the world? Am I right in the world? Am I lovable? Am I desirable? And if we don't get that answer, we look for it in other places.
We do. Right. We do.
But often, and people I think that have even had a decent relationship with their father, our earthly father still is broken as well, and will never be able to fully provide those things for us emotionally, but certainly has a great impact and is a great loss when that isn't present in our lives, because we're always wondering, am I beautiful? Am I lovely?
Am I worth it?
Yeah, am I worth it?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for sharing part of your story. And I do think it's so fascinating how God used your story to really ignite a fire and a passion within you to now use this as your mission.
Right.
Isn't it amazing how I love how God works in your book, your mission. So he takes someone once said to me that he takes our misery and turns it into our mission.
I like that.
Right?
Yeah.
Our misery turned mission. I like it too.
Yeah.
Well, Alesia, tell us a little bit about you. Tell us a little bit about your story.
Okay, I like the fact that all of us have different stories, but it's the same kind of process that we went through. I had a mother and a father like Nicole. And we grew up in the same household. My parents got a divorce when I was about 11. The problem was we were always in church, but we never seen our parents argue, and it was 4 of us. I am the next to oldest, but ended up kind of being the middle child because I have a brother that's right under me, but he's the only boy.
Okay.
So I ended up being the middle child, and it was kind of strange when they got a divorce because we didn't see any bad things. So immediately as a child, I particularly felt like it was our fault. It had to be us. We did something.
Yeah.
They were good. It had to be the kids. Like, we did something. And I never really got what we did. And of course, in retrospect, it wasn't us, it was them. They were like going outside to talk in the car, to, like have arguments, not around us. And although I respect the fact that they did that, they didn't really teach us that people who love one another can disagree. So it made me feel like life had to be perfect. Like everything had to be perfect. And after my dad left, my mother, she ended up becoming very angry and kind of bitter, but she didn't respond like a bitter person, but we lived with her, so I could tell, you know, and it would be many occasions where my father would call and they would get into an argument, and it's like you're a kid and you like really want to talk to your dad, and then they argue, one hangs up on the other. And back then we didn't have cell phones. So I might be telling my age, but
Girl, we had beepers.
Exactly. That's exactly what we had. So we had to page my dad, and then it was kind of like, will he call back, or does he think it's mom? You know, and so we didn't have a relationship with him after that. The strange part is we were in church. My dad is now a pastor and has been pastoring his own church for about 17 years. So we grew up in church. Church was a big foundation. So when all of this happened, it kind of like tore our entire world apart. It was like, Dad's gone. He's not in church. We had Bible study at home, different things like that is what we would do. And it was all gone. And then what they taught us was different. It's like, well, you taught us not to do this, and we're not supposed to. And that's exactly what he was doing.
It was probably pretty confusing as a kid.
It was very confusing. My siblings all responded different ways, and my older sibling, she became very angry, and she acted out, and she in school and things like that, which caused me to kind of become an introvert because my sister was doing a lot, and their focus was her. And so the rest of us kind of like, you know, we would be okay, we'll be okay. And that's kind of how I lived my life. Like, I'll be okay, I'll be okay. I started, my mother was over the hospitality ministry at church. And so she taught us how to serve and how to serve people. So I just indulged myself into serving people. I kind of felt like, I think if I made people happy, they wouldn't leave. So I developed the need to please, which was very dysfunctional. And it was really because I didn't want to deal with rejection. And
that's a really insightful, that's really insightful, because oftentimes like serving is not a bad thing, right? It's not. But I once heard someone say when a good thing turns into a God thing, or a way that we get our identity, that's when it kind of the smoke signals come up.
Definitely, definitely. I didn't have a relationship with my dad until I became a grown-up. Because he was there for like holidays and things, kind of like Brandy's dad. I could call him if I needed him, but other than holidays and me calling, that was about it. No birthday phone calls, he forgot, just different things. We were not a priority. And I found out later that you just never know what people are dealing with and how they were brought up. And that played a big role in his response to what was happening in his life. I later figured that out when I married when I was 19, went to college when I was 17, met my husband. He was 8 years older than me. I was looking for a father figure, somebody stable, because we had moved so many times, and we just didn't have a stable upbringing, although my mother did a very, very, very good job with what she had. She never brought men around us. We never had to deal with another man or her dating or anything like that. She did a really good job, kept us in church. So I just kind of indulged myself into making people happy. Like, I'm just gonna make everybody happy, and then they'll be happy with me. But I was miserable because I was doing things that I didn't want to do to make people happy.
So what was the turning point, and what's different for you now?
I got married young, and my husband was very controlling, and I didn't have like a sense of individuality. So when I was about 25, I got into a bad car accident and almost died, and it made me look at my life and say, like, is this really how I want to be? Is this what I want to be known for? Because if I was gone, this is all they would have of me. You know, life is too short to be stuck, and I didn't want to be stuck anymore. So I decided that I was going to find out who I was and what I liked and what I did not like about myself. And some of the things that I did not like, I did not necessarily change. I just kind of maybe tweaked them because they were still a necessary part of who I was. But my husband didn't like that. And it kind of led to the demise of our relationship. And then I learned later that the need for approval played a big role in why I was with him anyway. He was stable and he approved of everything I did, but life wasn't about us, it was about him.
Yeah.
So it kind of changed for me in that way.
Yeah, and you know, I hear a theme too, that is women, again, we look for that approval. And what do we look for? Approval, and we look for the approval of men.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you've grown through that and have had a lot of revelation, which I'm sure there's so much more to your story that we can learn about. I want to spend in the last handful of minutes that we have together, just spend a little bit of time talking about your book, Brandy. And I have to tell you that I was captivated very early on when I started reading it. And I just want to read a little bit of Brandy's book to you. And I think that most, if not all of you, are going to resonate with this. So this is what you say in the beginning of the book. You say, "This book is for the daughter who never knew the love of her biological father and thereby searched for love in strange places. This book is for the young lady whose father was home, but his undivided attention was elsewhere, and as a result, she does the most for male attention. This book is for the woman who knew her dad and knew he loved her, but didn't experience that love on a daily basis. To every young woman, for every time you really wanted to say no, but used sex to keep him attentive, and to every young woman who self-medicates to numb the pain of not feeling good enough, this book is for you. Finally, and no less importantly, this book is for fathers." I love this part. "Your presence, your support, your love, your time, and your daily influence in your daughter's life is critical. To every father who doesn't or didn't understand the impact of his regular presence in the life of his daughter, it's not too late. To every father who walked away because of the pain of a baby mama drama, it's not too late. Fathers, perhaps your own dad wasn't around you, so you had no example. Maybe you had to concentrate on earning a living, or maybe you just didn't grasp how important you are. Whatever the case is, now is the time to repair your relationship with your daughter. Call her today and continue to call her, knowing that you are strong, you are necessary, and you are vital." I cannot think of a better call to men out there to know the importance that they play in their daughter's life. I resonate with everything that I read, and that last part of fathers, and there's almost like a forgiving tone in there of maybe you didn't know and didn't have the best example, and that's something that you mentioned too, but there is still time to move towards your daughter, and there can be such great healing. Well, tell us a little bit more about kind of what's the experience been like since the book has launched, or what was even the experience as you were, I think earlier you said, I never really thought that I'd be writing a book, but obviously when God has different plans and we're listening. So what was the process like for you as you penned these words and as it went to press and now it's been released?
Initially it started out with during my Abrahamic experience in Arizona, just me taking some notes, writing some letters and sending them to my friends. And God said that you need to reach a bigger audience. There are women out there that are really, really struggling with this, and it's not talked about enough. Sometimes I think as women, we want to reserve our pride, and so to be vulnerable like that in writing, so it has been a little bit scary for me, which I kind of mentioned. No one wants to be judged, right? But at the same time, it's been invigorating. I've had women come to me and say, I needed to read this. I needed to be reminded of this pain because I've buried it so deep but I haven't dealt with it. So I think that's important. And you know, I was contemplating not releasing the book. And then I got a call from a family member that told me that her daughter had just attempted to hurt herself because of a relationship. And so I realized, like, this is still relevant and it's still important.
Right, right. And it takes a lot of courage to put ourselves out there, right? Because we open ourselves up to all kind of people's, their own drama that they want to inflict. But just the courage of enabling other people to experience their own level of awakening by sharing the power of your story, and I'm sure begin to seek the healing process, even in knowing, as we were saying a little bit earlier, that we're not alone. Oftentimes that's the very first step that we need to come out of hiding, right? And to start to make a change. Tell us a little bit, what would you say to the daughter who thinks her father does not love her and she's on her own?
You kind of read a little bit of what I would say. My dad didn't realize the impact of his presence. He didn't understand that him not being there or him not calling me or pursuing me, that it would have this sort of end game result. So I would say to the daughter that even though it may seem, and feelings are very real, right? They can consume us. Even though it may feel and seem like your father doesn't love you, chances are that he's doing the best that he can. So I think it's important to forgive him, because if you don't, you have the potential of carrying that with you for the rest of your life, and it will manifest itself in your relationships. Yes, it will. Even if you thought you've buried it deep down, forgive them.
It's interesting. I have someone that I know pretty well, and she actually has not seen her. I mean, she didn't grow up with her father. She had a brief interaction with him over a handful of times over a year, and basically, dismissed her. And she's estranged from her mother as well. And she she thinks, "I'm fine." I'm thinking, "You are not fine. You are not fine. You are not fine." Because those relationships, they make an impact whether they're present in our lives or they're not.
They're critical.
They teach you how to love. Those relationships, I think the strongest love is from a parent to a child. And sometimes when you don't experience that, or you don't feel like you're worthy of that type of love, so you really don't know how to love, because that's your first experience of love as a kid. It's from your parent.
Right.
So.
And I love that you bring up forgiveness, and there may be some people that think, forgiveness? I never forgive this, which is understandable, right? Because some people have experienced some really traumatic things, and we could probably do a whole show on that with your help on how to forgive. But one of the things that I love that you said is that we need to remember that our parents have a story too, and that there oftentimes is a lot of pain, a lot of trauma, and a lot of other things that go on where they're just not even aware of how it has affected their parenting. And then it's generational, right? And it takes, like, you three ladies and the other ladies that were on the show earlier to really interrupt that pattern and to say, you know what? I'm gonna choose something differently for the trajectory of my life. I'm gonna choose healing, or building our relationship with God, so that this isn't something that perpetuates itself, and takes a stand. So Brandy, tell us a little bit about how have the last 10 years of your life been as far as it relates to your relationship with God, having experienced all the things that you've experienced.
I never thought I would not carry the pain of the dysfunctional relationship with my father. I thought that was a pain and a hurt that I would have forever. I had settled that in my mind, that this is just a burden, your cross to carry. But the Lord has truly, truly healed my broken heart. My father and our relationship isn't completely restored. I still adore him because I'm a daddy's girl. But the Lord has really reminded me that even when that relationship is broken, that I think you're the greatest thing ever. And so it has changed my life. It's changed my relationships. It's changed how I identify with just other young women that are going through the same thing, and I can see like the pattern, and I'm just like, hold on, get back over here.
Yeah.
Like that's not the way.
Tell us a little bit about that, and anybody can respond to this. How are you using your story as you kind of identify and see that in other women? Like, tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, goodness. Well, I'll start with forgiveness, what Brandy just mentioned, or you just mentioned, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as forgiveness, you think that there's no way, or you think that you're good, like there's no need to rehash that. There's no need to even dig all that stuff up, or I don't need to talk to him, or whatever the case is. But forgiveness, as hard as it is,
Mm-hmm.
it is such a necessity for you to be able to go on. And so really advocating that, or even if you can't do any of the other stuff, reaching out to them, or changing your life around, that forgiveness piece can be like the beginning of just a whole new awakening for you.
Yeah,
and being able to move on to other aspects.
Mm-hmm.
And I just know with me, I'm like, my dad is selfish. Like, you're out in jail, you didn't think that you need to be around for me. Like, you think I'm good, you just assume that I'm good, and we just don't need to talk, Or, he called me on my birthday faithfully and Christmas or whatever, and I'm just like, okay, so what? And I'm thinking in my mind, like, there's nothing, there's nothing to forgive. It is what it is. But really exploring what forgiveness is and what it means for you and how it can really impact you and help you to move on to the next phase. And so speaking to young ladies about that, because that can be overlooked and you don't think that it's an important piece at all.
Yeah.
You think you could just get on with your life, or I'm just not going to think about it, or...
That's really good, and I think it's a great point to end on, because forgiveness or lack of it oftentimes keeps us more stuck from really being able to move on and fully live the life that God has intended us to live. And the other thing I just want to wrap up with as well is that the indicators that we may need some healing in this area, we may need some healing around our worth, or maybe we're fatherless, or we have a father but in some way is absent, is if we start to look for love in all the wrong places.
Yep. Strange places.
Yeah, right.
Really strange places.
Yeah. I love that. You put that in strange places. Yeah. Whether it be men or, abusing drugs or things that just we know that aren't healthy, but we keep going to them to try and fill something. Just an encouragement to anybody who is listening. If that's you, if you find yourself that you are just looking for love in all the strange places, that is an indication that there's some healing that you need. So we would really encourage you to reach out to a trusted friend, maybe someone at your church if you are a church attender, someone that you can talk to just start sharing your story with them so that you can start your journey to healing as well. Amen. Well, ladies, thank you so much. And Brandy, thanks for the courage of actually releasing the book, because you mentioned that you were not sure that you wanted to, but I love that God nudges us and that you listened, because it's a blessing. Well, let me pray for us before we wrap up.
Sure.
Father God, thank you so much for the opportunity to be with these awesome daughters, Lord, daughters of the King, who you look down on and you say, I delight in you. I lavish you with my love and my praise. Father, thank you that is true and that we didn't have to earn that. Lord, I thank you for each of these ladies' stories and how you are restoring them and continuing to renew them. Lord, and that you're using what was once their misery to be their mission in the areas of influence that they are in. God, so seal these gals up, and Father, that they would be hemmed in on all sides and have the full armor as they continue to do battle for you to help other women be free in these areas. And we thank you and we pray all these things in your holy name. Amen.
Amen.